Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Well, for many tech entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley is the equivalent of striking gold. But what is the dream like in reality? Paul Biggar from Circle CI joins me now to discuss his success in the tech world and his eye-opening experience in Silicon Valley. Paul, growing up in Ireland, was it always your ambition to be the founder of a tech startup?
I don't know if it was always a tech business. I was always into business. I was always like selling stuff or like thinking about companies. I nearly did business, but I ended up going into computers because I was really into that. And it turns out that going into computers in like 2000 was a really good idea for the way the world went in the subsequent 20 years. So I sort of ended up combining both. So after I did my PhD, I got into startups, and I'd be reading a lot of startup stuff.
And where did your interest in business originate from?
I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to be rich, and I don't remember that as an adult. Like I think that sort of went away. But I think along the way, it sort of got morphed into some interest in like building things. Like, yeah, today my interest is like largely about building things that people enjoy. So I think it ends up being a sort of a creative hobby, and the startup and the business aspect was just sort of the way of financing this.
So how did Paul Biggar, Trinity graduate, end up in California?
So I did my PhD in the sort of esoteric part of computer science, which is called compilers and stuff related to programming languages. And basically, the only place that people are doing interesting stuff there is in California. There's a couple of other places like Denmark and that kind of thing, but really it's all happening in California. And so after I did my PhD, I wanted to go there. And then conveniently, that's also where the whole Silicon Valley tech thing is going on. And in 2010, when I was thinking about moving there, it wasn't nearly as international as it is now. It's just a lot more centered in California. So I ended up moving for a job in compilers with Mozilla, the people who make Firefox, and I was working on Firefox. And basically, shortly after I got there, I wanted to take another stab at a startup, and I built Circle CI, which is sort of a lot related to the kind of problems I had when I was working at Mozilla.
And if you were to think now about Silicon Valley and compare it to the Irish business culture, how does it differ?
The thing I have been telling Irish startups for the last decade is like, get yourself a one-way ticket to Silicon Valley. But that's the same advice I gave to people coming from almost anywhere. And what's changed in the last 10 years, apart from this whole coronavirus thing, which is going to have a major change, but startups have become a lot more international. It's possible to do them from a lot more places. And Silicon Valley has gotten extremely expensive. So like there's really no better time to do a tech startup outside Silicon Valley as there is today.
And Paul, how did moving to Silicon Valley develop your own mindset?
How did it develop my own mindset? What an interesting question. I think one of the things about it is there's a lot of feedback. And this is a good thing and a bad thing. So it's a bit of an echo chamber. There's a bit of a bubble there. You start to think like all these other people, but all these other people are also like thinking in a startup mentality. And what I mean by startup really is like high growth. People don't care about small businesses. They don't care about having like something successful and interesting. They really just care about how do you make $1 billion company, which has a lot of upsides if you're trying to do that sort of thing, and quite a few downsides if you're not.
Paul, Circle CI has been a great success for you, and we will discuss this venture in more detail later. But you have dubbed your first startup as a failure. Why so, and what did you learn from this experience?
So there's been a bunch of failures along the way, actually. So the one that you're referencing is my first California startup, which is called News Labs. But I had a previous failure before that, which is where myself and a bunch of lads from my CS class made a startup together. And after 5 months, I left sort of a little bit disillusioned, but also just sort of didn't work out for me for a bunch of reasons. And the major thing that I learned from both of those, from those two, is that you want to really understand what it is that you want from the startup. You want to have like basically the same values as the startup. In Silicon Valley, they refer to this as like founder market fit. So like building a product that you really believe in, that you really understand. And I think that isn't the case for everyone. I think not everyone needs that. Some people, will sell anything and all they want to be doing is selling, and it doesn't matter what they're selling. But that's not the case for me. So my the News Lab startup, that was about journalism, and I really wasn't into it. And it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it was a natural sort of extension of the original idea I had, which was really around blogging. But I just didn't care about the problem space. And that's why I've worked in developer tools since then. They like Circle CI and my current startup Dark. They're both about like making life easier for software engineers, and that's a problem I really understand. I can really get into.
Now, for many tech entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley is the ultimate ambition. But does it, in your opinion, live up to its expectations?
A lot of good things and a lot of bad things. The expectations I had, and I think the expectations that a lot of software engineers have is based on this sort of like mythical time that Paul Graham writes about in his essays. Paul Graham is one of the one of the grandfathers of Silicon Valley. Sort of convinced a lot. His writings created the sort of modern Silicon Valley and the huge startup boom that we see now. And the world has really changed from the sort of things that he was writing about in 2003, 2005. Like it's sort of like that, but also combine your imagination of like Wolf of Wall Street, or sort of like Wall Street 2007, where like everyone who's interested in the money has also come into the scene. And there's a lot of downsides that come with that. And the one that's in it for me is like it's a lot less about the technology. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just makes it less interesting for me.
And Paul, of course, you famously attended the party, which was dubbed as a party on the edge of the earth. But what really happened at that particular party?
Oh yeah, I was wondering when you'd get to that. So honestly, there wasn't much that I saw happening at the party. But what happened was there's a book that came out called Brotopia, which is about how basically women get abused in Silicon Valley and sort of by the patriarchy and that sort of thing. And this particular book, there was a chapter about this particular party, which it turned out I was at. And the allegations that the woman who's just referred to as Jane Doe were that basically a lot of people expected things that were not appropriate for a work party. So there's cuddling and that sort of thing, and the whole party was set up in a sort of like intimate environment where there was a lot of innuendo about what the party was about, and it sounds like a party, and it sounds like that's what parties are. There's like drugs and fooling around and stuff, but it was like this was a VC's annual event, and so it was like billed as this sort of like hush hush thing, but also billed as like, well, this is the place that we come and do business. And really sort of like inappropriate combining of the two.
This particular party had quite a guest list, but was it essentially a sex party?
I think it was an inappropriate merging of like a sort of like intimate party. I didn't stay long enough to know whether it like fully descended into that with like a professional party. And so what had happened is that the guy who was the head of the VC firm, Steve Jurvetson, had like invited all of his burner friends to this party and like pitched them on like the standard, burner party, burner meaning Burning Man, where all this behavior is like perfectly acceptable, and also combined it with the inviting the people that his firm had invested in. and really the problem came from, if those had been two parties, there would have been no problem at all, but it was the fact that they were one party.
So what impact did this particular night have on you personally, and did it shape the way that the tech world worked in Silicon Valley?
So I think this particular party didn't have it was one step. It came during the Me Too movement. It came during a time where people were questioning the misogyny of Silicon Valley, and in particular looking at VCs and how VCs had invested in women-started companies. So if you look at the amount of money that's going to women-started companies, it's dwarfed by the amount of money that goes to companies that were started by men. The people who run Silicon Valley, to a certain extent, are the VCs. They are the money, and they're not all men, but it's like a massive majority men. And so it really kickstarted, not the party, but the movement kickstarted this question about it. And so this was, one small step in that. And I think the big thing around it was this book, Utopia, and which I recommend people read to get a sort of sense of that kind of problem. And also there was an excerpt of it was published as a Vanity Fair article, and that was a moment in the thing. And along with it, what was happening at Uber with Susan Fowler's stuff were like really big moments in sort of the Silicon Valley Me Too movement.
And in your opinion, were women exploited through sex in order to progress in the Silicon Valley tech world?
That isn't something that I can give first-hand account of, but the worldview I have come to is that there are a lot of very bad power dynamics being set up where, which are sort of they also exist in many places in the world and sort of have existed throughout time. But that happens in Silicon Valley for sure.
Well, I certainly hope that the Me Too movement has put a stop to that for once and for all. Now, let's get back to your own company. Circle CI has been a phenomenal success to date, but tell us about the original concept behind the startup.
Yeah, so Circle started in about 2011, late 2011, and the original idea was that a lot of things were moving to the cloud. So, in particular, two of our partners, GitHub, which is a huge company that's used by every software engineer, and that was sold to Microsoft recently for over $7 billion. So they had been established around 2009, and they had helped all of software engineers move their code into the cloud. And there was a natural adjacency to that. There's a natural business next to it to test and deploy people's code that were in the cloud, and that was what we built.
So, what is Circle CI, and what particular client base does it actively serve?
So that's kind of an interesting question. So Circle CI is developer workflow automation. And what that basically means is that software engineers, software developers use it to automate part of their workflow. In particular, the part of their workflow that gets the code that they write into the central code repository and into the servers where their customers can access it. And it's basically testing and automation to make sure that this is safe and repeatable. The market that we serve is kind of an interesting thing. So it's a developer tool, so our end users are developers. But unlike a lot of companies that were created before that, we went bottom up. So our customers were the individual developers, not the companies that own them, or not the companies that hired those developers. And we get that approach very much in the same way that Dropbox got its customers, where it wasn't that they had a big sales force go out and sell to Fortune 500 companies, but rather that all the people who worked at these companies were already using Dropbox, and so it came into the company that way. Very similar thing among developers for how Circle CI got adopted.
And Paul, how actively involved in this company are you?
So these days I'm on the board. So I ran the company for the first 3.5 years. Until 2015, and then I've sat on the board since then.
And of course, Circle CI recently raised additional funding. So how will this fast-track the growth trajectory?
So Circle just raised another $100 million in Series E funding, and they've raised about 220 million total. And the there was a way that it would that this would help, that we knew when we went dead when the current management team went dead and fundraised, and then coronavirus happened. So I think all plans were like thrown out the window at that stage. But the intent was to continue continuing investing in the product and continue investing in sales and marketing. And I think that the rough idea stays the same, but coronavirus changes absolutely everything about how that's going to happen.
In relation to COVID-19, how long do you expect the impact of it will be felt by the tech sector in the US?
I think we've yet to figure that out. I think everyone is going pretty cagey with it. But fundamentally the top line of the economy affects the money that goes into venture capital, and the amount of money that goes into venture capital affects how much is available to startups. In particular, low interest rates in the last decade have led to a lot of money going to venture capital, which has led to a lot of money being available for startups. And a lot of that money is still there. But what traditionally happens when the money dries up is that funds save their money for their existing investments rather than making new investments, because they don't know when any more money will come. So what typically happens is the success stories, people double down on them. The companies which aren't successful are sort of cut loose. The companies that are on the middle of the line might get some support, but are going to have to do layoffs and get aggressive in becoming profitable. And then new companies have to reach a higher bar or to do more with less money in order to get started.
And as a serial entrepreneur in the tech space, what is your next move?
So I'm working at Dark. So that's darklang.com. And what we make is a way of building cloud services for that's much easier for engineers. So basically, building the software behind all these apps that we use is a complete nightmare today. And Dark attempts to make that 10 times easier through a sort of a combination by like combining a bunch of tools that engineers use into a single tool.
That certainly sounds very interesting. And finally, what advice do you have for aspiring tech entrepreneurs this morning?
I think the main one, and this is one that people that don't really think about, is like focus a lot on your values. Like why are you becoming a tech entrepreneur? What is it that you want? Is the win big at all costs really the thing that you want? And I think this especially counts for like when you're looking at co-founders and looking at who you work with. Make sure that they want the same thing that you want and that you're able to work together, because you're going to be in this for a long time if it works.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Paul Biggar from Circle CI, and I would like to thank Paul for sharing a fascinating insight into life in Silicon Valley with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.